This is Internet Marketing.
Hello and welcome to the Internet Marketing Podcast brought to you by SiteVisibility. I'm your host, Scott.colenutt, and with me today is Paul Rakovich, founder of Clicks and Clients. And we're going to be discussing how to scale your Facebook ads in 2022. Welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's
No
great
problem.
to be here.
Thank you. And do you want to take a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners and describe a little bit more about what you do at Clicks and Clients?
Sure. So a little bit of backstory. After college, I had a degree in hotel and restaurant management, moved to Las Vegas to work in restaurants, and I started this e-commerce business on the side that ended up doing pretty good. And at one point, I kind of looked at my future in the restaurants and saw kind of the future there, and I was like, man, I really like this marketing stuff. And I don't know if restaurants are it for the rest of my life. And so I took the chance to go do what I was doing for my e-commerce business for clients. So I kind of hung my sign out and gave it a year to make it work. And if it didn't work, the plan was to go back into the restaurants. But obviously here we are 13 years later. So grown from me managing people's Google AdWords to kind of a full service digital agency, primarily focused on Facebook ads, PPC ads, and clients ranging from $3,000 to $5,000 a month, over $1 million a month, and all kind of having the common thread of we're trying to optimize to a specific result or end result. So we're not doing a lot of branding work or, hey, this ad got a lot of views. It's really kind of down and dirty. We spent this, we got this. How do we make it better?
How long from when you started your career in marketing to when you decided to focus full-time on Facebook ads was it?
So when I was working in the restaurants, that business ran for about 3 years. And it was a really nice little business. It was before Google AdWords actually kind of existed. So it was in Overture. But it was very much, my credit card. I had product inventoried in my garage. And I kind of lived this interesting double life for about 3 years where I'd go to work at 2 in the afternoon, come home at 4 in the morning, get up, work on the business, go to work at 2 o'clock. So about 3 years. And then I was kind of a solo one-man show for about the first year and a half until I started to have enough business to take on employees and starting to expand the business, basically. About a year and a half, I would say, of kind of a one-man band.
Was there anything particularly appealing about Facebook ads for you that made you think, yeah, this is where I'm going to spend kind of the next stage of my career?
It was actually an employee that we had at the time who came to me, and we hired him. His name was Curtis. He said, he was hired for Google Ads, and he said, Google's really boring, and I think this Facebook thing is going to be super cool. And so I said, all right, congratulations, you're now the director of Facebook ads. And also you kind of still have to do your old job. And and so he's like, all right, great. And him and I sat down every year for 3 years and we said, here's what we want to do. Here's where we want to take things. Here's what we need. And he would obviously say, here's how much money I want to make. And so that really grew from kind of the right rail ads, kind of early, really basic, to about a year after that, it kind of started to pop, and the audience targeting and uploading a customer list and being able to target those people. Around that time, it felt like there's something really special here. And the ad format started to change around that time. That's when it started to pop, and I knew we were on to something at that point.
So it sounds like in the Facebook world, you've been in the Facebook ad world for around a decade, maybe just over. Is that about right?
Yeah, did it start? Maybe 7-8 years ago, somewhere around there. I think
Yeah.
we kind of was first ugly, awful right-hand ads was they were pretty bad.
Well, it leads me, I think before we talk about kind of winning and growing clients in Facebook ads and scaling Facebook ads, I really wanted to start off because I know you've been in the industry for a while and specialized in Facebook ads. I'm really curious to know your perspective on how things have changed. And I say that because so much has gone on with Facebook ads, particularly over this last maybe 3 years.
Sure.
So can you achieve on Facebook ads now what you could achieve a decade ago? Is it still possible? Is it still special as you described it?
It's definitely still special. There's definitely still some secret sauce to it, and it's certainly not what it was a year ago. I think it'll take some time if it does ever get back to that. But I would say it was a progression of, write real ads that were pretty bad. And then it was like I feel like uploading a customer list and being able to target those people was like, whoa,
Yeah.
like that's a big deal. And then, the additional placements came in and audiences. And it was like, okay, I could target someone who's interested in this or who has done this activity, or I can layer these together. And I felt like it went pretty specific to where you could parse out, you could run an ad targeting 10 different people that like Tony Robbins and this person, this person, this person. Then you could monitor the results and you could bring it back and you could go, well, Tony Robbins people, like we had a client who it was for a women's event and we targeted people that like Oprah and Ellen and Tony Robbins. And the leads for Ellen and Oprah were super cheap, but no one bought a ticket. And the leads for women that like Tony Robbins, like they're more expensive, but we had a lot of ticket sales. And so we had these like interesting specific learnings. And then I'd say the next phase is it went broad. Like it just went broader and you put the pixel down and you told Facebook, give me people that buy tickets and here's people that have bought tickets. And Facebook kind of just did its thing to the point where it was like, it was never easy, but it was certainly a bit counterintuitive to go really broad. And it was certainly Facebook was doing something pretty magical. And then iOS happened and it definitely has put a ding in things and they just don't have what they used to have. So I would say, accounts where we were generating 2 to 4,000 leads a day back in prime time, like those accounts doing well are generating like 1,000 to 1,500 leads a day. And that's pretty good. So you can still target interests. You still have to kind of go broad. Creative, I would say, is the main thing that hasn't changed. Like good creative is what's still cracking these accounts open. But that's kind of how I've seen the flow and the change. So I think it's still a great piece of the puzzle for a marketing mix. I still think we can target people based on what they're interested in. The difference being with Google AdWords, for example, like the intents in Google AdWords. So we know someone's looking to buy something. We don't necessarily know that the same way on Facebook, but we certainly can still slice and dice the data like a fair amount.
When Google started to roll out algorithm changes in maybe 2011, 2012, that was such a big change for the industry. For Facebook ads, it feels like the last couple of years, it's been a similar monumental change to how things operate. You just mentioned there, one of the reasons is iOS, but I think it's the political awareness, and also societal changes as well. All of those things factor into maybe people's perception of Facebook. And the reason I ask the question is because, and I imagine you get this sometimes as well, is that we get prospects or sometimes clients saying, we don't think we can achieve or we're not achieving what we could 5-10 years ago. When you take a step back and think, well, you've had iOS changes, you've had societal changes in views on advertising and privacy in the UK, GDPR. It's really no surprise that you can't achieve the same things that maybe you could 5-10 years ago.
I agree. All those are definitely contributing factors. And even I think it was one of the first times ever there's less users on Facebook, but there's still a ton. An account or campaign, like when these clients are mentioning, I mean, they could work. It could not be working because it's bad strategy. It could not be working because it's bad execution. There's so many different variables with it. Like it could be working, but the client's not calling the leads back, and we don't really, you don't know that, and they just go, ugh, Scott, the leads stink. Facebook, it's garbage, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like all these things have to be firing on all these cylinders for this to work. And so it's definitely different. But it was last year or before iOS changed, it was easier, no question about it. Like no question about it. And I think that's gone. So kind of like on the SEO side of things, there had to be like a reality check of like, you better get with the times. And so the way I see it on Facebook is you got to get back to being a good marketer. Like you got to get back to writing better copy. You got to get back to looking at what happens past the click. You got to get back to looking at one of the things that we do quite a bit in these accounts is each of them is a little different from a structure standpoint and like a setup standpoint. And so we're having a lot of conversations of like lowest cost as a bidding methodology, like works in some accounts and doesn't work in others. And they're one of our largest accounts never worked on lowest cost until about 4 or 5 months ago. And now like it works. And so we're having to have a lot of conversations around one, like, let's just do better. And two, we have to throw out a lot of ideas of what we thought worked, quote unquote, worked or didn't work, or, this doesn't work in this account, or this one's different. Like we're revisiting a lot of stuff that we've tried in the past that maybe didn't quote unquote work for a period of time.
I'm interested to know, just before we go into scaling ads and some of that, really just touching on what you were just talking about there in more detail, your journey and how you grew your company. So you actually talked a little bit there about starting off with some smaller clients. Was it a fairly traditional route for you over the decade? So did you start to grow incrementally from maybe $1,000, $2,000 clients up to 10,000, 100,000, and then so on? I know at this stage you've managed $1 million per month clients on Facebook ads. How did you get to that point?
Yeah, going way back, we really had one client that they're really the impetus to the growth, to be honest. So they came to us actually asking if we did SEO. And we just said, I said, of course we do. And we're great at it. And when would you like to get started? And it was, that client just kept growing with us. And so, kind of everything that they asked if we did, I said, of course we do. Of course. Where can we send an invoice? But that client, that client really grew the business from a service standpoint. So we got into SEO, we got into some stuff that we didn't necessarily do. And then they also pushed us to do things that we maybe wouldn't have thought of at first, or structure things in a way that we wouldn't have thought of. And then it got to a point where it was great to have the business because it was a really nice chunk of business, but it was also like a huge part of the business, right? And if something happened, then we were in trouble. And just knowing clients don't last forever, it was pretty top of mind that like, hey, you got to make hay while the sun's out. So we worked pretty hard to expand outside of that one particular client and invested some resources in that and spent some money and kind of ate our own dog food about testing and trying different things, knowing that there isn't like an ace in the hole. And I would say the Facebook shift was other being aware of what's going on, paying attention, taking a shot with this one employee. Like, again, it was a test, right? Like, hey, try it. By the way, you still have to do your other job, and I can't really pay you more, but let's go investigate. And if it works, like things, we'll make sure it's worth everyone's while. So it was that original client, and then not original, but one client that grew quite a bit. And then from there, I feel like that just kind of pushed us into a different stratosphere of leads that were coming in. Also, just comfort and being able, a little bit of chicken and egg, right? A little bit of comfort in saying, yes, we know how to manage an account that spends $300,000 a month. And because we're actively doing that, we're seeing some things that are timely and important. We're able to have conversations that we couldn't have had. You're just managing Dr. Parsa's old $5,000 a month, AdWords account.
Was it that initial client, that $300,000 a month, that eventually became a $1 million per month client, or did that come much later in the journey?
That came a little bit later with another client who, they were a large advertiser. We had been brought in to manage Facebook ads, and they were in San Diego. We flew out. We had taken the ad account from about $30,000 a month to, I can't remember, $50,000, $60,000 a month, and we thought we were like hot stuff. And we walk in the office, and within 5 minutes, they say, "You guys are nice. This is cool, but they're spending about $5 million a month on media." They said, if we can't get this up to at least a couple $100,000 a month, like not worth our while. And so this is right around the time when things started to go to that kind of broad mentality. And we looked at them and said, like, well, there's only so many people in these areas that are interested in what you're selling, and the addressable market's too small. And so we left that meeting thinking like we probably weren't going to come back, but we gave it kind of one last hurrah with this client around this particular event. And they said, you guys have carte blanche to like go bonkers, basically. And you have to figure out how to target 3 million people instead of 60,000 people, or else like you're not playing a game we can never win. we developed this very complicated rubric with them. We launched the ads. We spent a ton of money, and the cost per lead was astronomical. And they came back to us and said, "All right, you figured out how to target 3 million people in the city. Now we need to solve for the rest of the issues, but we're confident that you can figure it out. And we know that, as long as we target these people, this many people will be in good shape." And it had a real big epiphany looking at their display ads, because the display ads were also about $1 million a month. And these ads were so counterintuitive, like all features, no benefits. You could barely tell what the product was, targeting a broad audience. And I was like, this like goes against everything that we
Yeah.
ever taught. And so I looked at one of the ads and I saw something in them that we replicated in Facebook, and that account the next month spent about $300,000. And then it was like 500,000, then $1 million, and then it almost eclipsed 2 million one January, which was kind of the prime time. But that one was the big breakthrough. And that was pretty wild, like going to lunch, coming back, and the account would spend like $15,000 in an hour, like, just bonkers.
And I'm curious to know how you felt at that time when you're sitting there and you get to that point where you spent £15,000, after lunchtime or whatever. Is that intimidating, exciting, a bit of both? How were you feeling? Can you remember?
Well, first I was glad it wasn't my money, because it is scary. But we did actually make a mistake on that account once.
Right.
So we launched an account on Friday, which is like a total no-no, and the account spent $70,000 over the weekend and had really bad results. And I called the client and said, like, "Hey, you're probably gonna be pretty mad. You might fire me." And he said, "So how bad? Like 10,000?" And I was like, "No, worse." And he's like, 20, 40, and he's like, "Dude," he said, "I don't know if I can keep you, but I appreciate you making the phone call." So we had some tough lessons at that level that were expensive. We ended up eating part of that ad spend, but also just a really understanding client who he went back to the president of the company and said, "These guys are going to take a pretty good chunk of this in the shorts. And if we ding them harder, we're going to put them out of business. And what good is that going to do? Like, no one's going to learn anything."
Mm-hmm.
And so he saved that relationship, which continued to flourish for many years. But yeah, getting to that ad spend is a bit nerve wracking. Facebook can be inconsistent sometimes. And yeah, you're dealing with big budgets and stuff goes super quick. And if you turn a dial the wrong way at the wrong time, like, you could be in trouble. So a lot of learning lessons came from that. Like, we don't launch on Fridays, and you don't change the budget on a lowest cost campaign in the evening. If you give Facebook $1,000 a day, it'll spend $1,000 a day. If you change that from 1,000 to 10,000 at 10 o'clock at night, it's going to spend that $9,000 in 2 hours and go bonkers. So some learning lessons out of those times. But yeah, it's wild to see. It's wild to see how many people. Gives you a little bit of scope for how many people are on the platform, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're spending that much, and we're just a small drop in the bucket. And it's like, we had a couple ads with like 1 billion plus impressions, like, pretty wild.
From a business perspective, I suspect the answer is that you kind of always want to work with those high revenue clients. But purely looking at it through a marketing lens, that particular client sounds like it was really exciting to work with because they were understanding, number one, they were willing to experiment, number two, so you were able to use that budget and have a little bit of creative freedom with it. But again, looking at it from a marketer's perspective, what are the pros and cons of working at that level? And do you have a preference? Do you like working with $1 million clients, or when you're working with them, do you ever miss the kind of smaller, £5,000-10,000 a month clients?
I love the ones where it's like something's working pretty well and they have a good product, but they need a little bit of strategy, a little bit of execution, a little more manpower. Like, those are really fun. The ones at $1 million from a business standpoint, you start to get into these billings, and of course the clients are saying, "Well, I'm cutting you this pretty hefty check, and I could hire 3-4 people to do this full time, and why should I do that instead of paying you? Because I know we're not your only client." So there's some concerns at that high level. I like the ones in the middle. So the smaller ones are interesting and fun. Think there's a lot of expectation setting, but I really like the ones in the middle. where I know we can have an immediate impact. And the ones at the high level, the $1 million, I feel grateful to have those, grateful for the learnings. The folks that we're dealing with on the opposite end are just super fun to chat with and to mind meld with. Like, I think there was a period of time initially where it was like, do we deserve to be sitting at the same table? And so I think it's a cool feeling now knowing like we know our stuff and we can hang at that level if we need to. And it's a neat feeling. It's a neat feeling to be around folks that are operating at that level.
What
Yeah.
triggers are you looking for, particularly at that maybe £10,000 or $10,000 level? What really gives you the confidence to say, yeah, we can scale this up now?
It's a really good question. We are just having this conversation yesterday. So there's got to be some parameters around it. I think it's a matter of like giving the accounts enough legs to get some results back without being wasteful. So we were having a conversation with a client, it's either yesterday or the day before. We're really focused on day-to-day revenue. It's like, the leads are pretty expensive. Turn stuff down. We're doing pretty good. Turn it up. And the conversation we had was, it's too reactionary and we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. And so having an expectation of scaling and kind of going to that next level, I think has to have some wiggle room for error. So for example, on this particular account, it was the daily budget's about $500 a day. The account's doing pretty well, but it's not going to hit the goals unless we're spending about $4,000 to $5,000 a day. And so we're having a collaborative discussion around, do we notch it up from 500 to 700 to 1,000? Knowing that some days might not be great and being okay with that. I think that's a real key to it. Like, you can't go from 500 to 700, have a bad day, and then drop it back to 5. Or do we go directly to 4,000, kind of bite our tongue for the next week or two, get it through the learning phase, which we know is going to do better, and do we go that route? So we're like actively having that discussion on what the guardrail should be to scale it up. So which is the right answer? Like, I certainly have a preference, but we're going to do it collaboratively with the client. So I think things are going pretty well. The campaigns are budget capping each day is a good indicator. So when we give Facebook $500 to spend, it's spending 500 every single day like clockwork. So we know there's more room there. And then still giving it some parameters of, when we go from 500 to 700, here's the acceptable range. So we don't freak out and turn everything down the very next day. That, I think getting through that phase is really key to scaling and having some parameters of like, we're going to grin and bear it for 2 weeks. Our strategy, our thought process is, we're doing well currently at 500. Our other thought process is getting through the learning phase is going to make things perform better. Therefore, if we grin and bear it for a few days, we'll get through it and things will be okay. So that's kind of the plan going forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm hearing there like the metrics, like you've got your budget caps, and if you're achieving your budget limits, then that's a good sign that there's room to maneuver. The second thing that
Correct.
I've heard there is that it's useful, particularly as a marketer, if you are going to scale and you're starting to talk about scaling, that the client on the other end of the table, they're comfortable knowing that some experimentation is needed. And as they scale, results, particularly immediately, might not be exactly what they're expecting. And you need a little bit of time to learn. I think that really leads me to the third thing that I'm curious about, which is resource. So, for example, if you go from a $500 a month client to $5,000, I assume that you also need to make sure that you have the resource to create things like ad assets, ad copy. That's, I assume, more work for someone. So is resource and maybe recruitment part of that process as well?
Resource, definitely, especially with creative. Then also knowing it's a sweet spot, right? It's like, we could change out the creative every single day, but we won't get ads we won't get any ads that get any traction. The other side of it is, if you're not refreshing and throwing some new stuff in the mix, these ads do get stale on Facebook, especially into like TikTok, even more so. There's creative fatigue, like very real things. So yeah, creative is the biggest piece. And then testing, what I've told our team in the past is like, we want to test everything under the sun. Like, give me one or two good tests to start, and let's execute those one or two great before we go bonkers crazy and test, all kinds of different stuff. Like, let's define something that we think is of interest. And I think that's the difference between a test and an optimization. A test is, I'm seeing ads with females are performing better. I have an inkling about this. I want to run a test, female versus male, or one person versus two. And I feel like getting a couple of good tests off when you get to that $5,000 or pounds a month, that's a great starting point. Like, you can test everything under the sun, but getting a reasonable test off that has enough budget behind it, to me, that's more valuable than trying to test too much. So I would just caution folks from trying to test everything under the sun, versus like, show me two good tests a month on an account over 6 months, and that account's going to do well.
It leads me to think about how to scale. So we've kind of discussed a little bit there about maybe what triggers would lead you to want to scale or give you the confidence to scale. But then how to scale is different, because let's say let's just take a $500 a month example. I assume
Sure.
at that level, we have maybe static assets. So maybe you have a copywriter, or maybe you've got someone doing that entire creative job. At the 5,000 level, maybe you start experimenting with different formats, carousel, videos, that type of thing. Is that also,
Sure.
do you start to experiment with formats as part of that testing period and when you're scaling?
Yeah, I think video creation, it's a really good question. Video creation is super important, having that 20-second, even if it's just a down and dirty motion graphic. Those can be expensive to produce. And so finding something or someone that can get something like down and dirty. I like even just kind of a general like PowerPoint recorded slideshow, like,
Right.
or let's just create a little motion graphic on something and turn it into a video.
Yeah.
So I think as you're going from the 500 to maybe 5,000, you can start to experiment into those things without having to spend $500 to create a video ad or $1,000 to create a video ad. So I would say getting into down and dirty ad formats at that point are super helpful. General rule of thumb, 2-3 statics and 1 motion graphic video, 20 seconds, give or take. Like, I just want to have those in the mix, even if they're not all great performers, but definitely want to have those in the mix. I would say video is definitely a driver in almost all of our accounts. Video ads probably still responsible for half the spend in many accounts, if not more. And without that, you don't get quite the same action just having static ads.
Taking that upper level, so going above that 5,000 range, maybe going to 10,000 or beyond, maybe even up to 100K at this point. How much? What are the biggest changes when you go tenfold and you go from 10K to 100K? My assumption is there would be more automation, perhaps, that you do get to experiment more with video and format a little bit more. But what are some of the other biggest changes when you scale from that 10K level to 100K?
I think sometimes it's almost easier. So you've got these campaigns now that are going to get out of the learning phase in like half a day or a day.
Right.
And
so speed is important, or speed is one of the benefits.
Absolutely. You're able to take some different audiences and slice and dice. I'd say the structure of the campaign gets more complicated. So at that 100K up, maybe you're running a video ad for video views, then you're remarketing people back to the page with an offer, with the second ad. Maybe you're testing out different audiences of lookalikes, like here's a 1% plus some interest, here's this. I would say the complexity of audiences gets a little more complicated at that level. And then I think the importance of strategy gets more important as well. So at 10K, I think you're throwing something out there, you're getting some results. It's working pretty well, ideally. And you can test. Let's test a video. Let's test a guy versus a gal. Let's test a little bit of copy. I think once you're hitting that 100K, you really have to take a step back on strategy. And that's, I think, where strategy starts to become much more important. And we can start to get more specific. So to give you an example, like on this one account, we know that the desktop ads are worth about 1.5x of a mobile ad. And so we can begin to look at Do we take desktop out? Do we target desktop separately? What are the different strategies that we can do around that? And then we can work forward. If we take this out, do this extra work, like what do we need to get out of that for that to be worthwhile? So the strategy piece definitely gets more complex. We're looking at the 100K to like a million. We're looking at top states. We're looking at treating demographics differently. We might have just doing a lot of different, more complex. But strategy, I'd say strategy is probably the biggest piece that comes into play at that level. So that desktop being like a simple example, that maybe at 10K, it's just not worth it to separate it out, and it's not worth the time, energy, and effort. But at 100K, it might be worth looking at how to treat those desktop targets differently than mobile.
Two questions around this level. So one is really interesting as you're talking. One thing that comes to mind for me is data analysis as well. Mm-hmm. So do data analysis or just having an analyst on an account, does that become way more important at 100K level than at that kind of 10K level?
Yeah, I think it's important to have someone, but then also it's like, what do you do with it? So I think it's important having the team involved in that analysis to some point. When someone's just pulling reports and they're like, oh, desktop's better, or this is different, this is better, we still have someone on the team looking at that and going, that's great, but then what? And so it's good to have someone pulling information. It's good to have someone organizing that so that the expensive person you're paying isn't doing the menial work. But I also feel like someone still has to take a step back and go, so now what? Now what? Great. Women are or have a higher revenue per lead than men. So now what do we do? And that has to be translated into insight to the client. And then typically what I ask the team is like, the clients want insight and they want a recommendation on what's next. So we're seeing females perform differently. We're going to do a 2-week test separating out the genders. We're going to bid the females 15% higher. Here's what we're hoping for results. Here's a risk of that once we separate the males and females, the accounts won't perform as well. So if we're running into issues 3 days into the test and this is the result, we're going to pause it or keep eyeballs on it. So I think the analysis of the data is awesome, but then it's like, so what do you do next with it? And that's something that we see. We bring consultants in periodically just to get additional eyeballs on stuff. And sometimes they'll bring it back and they're like, oh, we saw this magical thing about females versus males. It's like, okay, well, cool. But then what do you do with it? So that's the second piece of it, in my opinion, is like, great to get insights, but then what? And sometimes those insights pan out, sometimes they don't. But being able to structure them with kind of a next move is equally, if not more important.
My other question in this area is about software. So does the software, particularly the third-party software you need outside of Facebook, change as you scale up as well?
I don't think so. I still think Excel, some insights, and being in the account is really key. Like being actually in the interface, watching it and these large accounts are watching hour by hour. And so the level of like intimacy with how things are doing and our ads are doing, like the team knows what's going on just because they're in the mix. And so I'd rather have the team in the account. I think what changes is the organization of the data. So we use like Supermetrics to pull Facebook spend in. That gets piped into a sheet where the client updates the revenue real time. That creates a dashboard. Like the organization of it's important, but I still think someone being in the mix is important. Someone looking at things. Even our Facebook rep the other day pointed out something interesting on CTR between these two ads, and we're like, oh, good. That's an interesting point. So yeah, the tools, I'd say the organization of the data becomes more complex. The presentation to the client becomes more sophisticated in both collating all the information, but at the end of the day, presenting it. And what I often tell the team is like, yeah, our clients at $1 million a month, they already know the cost per lead. They already know the top performing ad. They already know how we did last Tuesday. So we have to bring are insight and recommendation as the next step, because just regurgitating something or sending them a data studio that has the data, slice and dice 6 ways to Sunday, like they already know it. So we have to bring a different level of sophistication.
That's interesting, because something else I'm seeing and kind of hearing as you talk that through is you talked about structure, governance is how I describe it, at that 10K level, going up to 100K as being really important, and you being able to see the results just from better structure, better optimization. But at the million level, when the client already knows the numbers, then really you start to use creativity seems to become more important.
Yeah, those folks too, they're often leaning on us for what we're seeing elsewhere in other accounts that are at that similar spend level. So they want to know, did you see something weird in the last week? Are you seeing CPMs go up because of Valentine's Day and Super Bowl? Did you have a weird spend spike yesterday at 7 o'clock? And we're going back. So we're able to borrow things from other accounts at that level, or insights that we're seeing, come back and say, I know lowest cost didn't work for a really long time, but we've tested in this other account that also is similarly not working, and we're having good results. And we want $1,000 a day to test this. Here's the parameters for it. So yeah, giving them something beyond this, like they already know the stats.
And just in closing for this episode, I'm interested in you work with, and just as you've spoken that through, you do work with a broad range of clients at these different levels. Are the misconceptions about Facebook ads that they come to you with, maybe misunderstandings, the things that you have to educate people on, very similar regardless of the level, or do they differ quite a lot?
I think they all are. Everyone's a little skeptical of the platform and where it's headed, and can this work for my business? I think there's always like a little dose of skepticism. I would say, generally speaking, we're just playing a little different game at that highest level. So at the smaller level, we're spending a budget, uh, and if you spend less, you're better. At the middle level, they're going to give us $5,000. We're going to get $20,000 in bookings, and they're in pretty good. They're happy with that. At the highest level, I would say more often than not, we are typically optimizing to a lifetime value, and so where that might be different, we're generating an initial action that folks not looking at that would look at it and go like, how do you spend that much for a lead that doesn't make sense? How can you spend $5,000 to acquire a $5,000 charter sale at the end of the day? You're losing money. And I think the larger spenders looking at it going, yes, I'm getting a one-time $5,000 sale, but I'm also getting people, average person comes back 3 times over the lifetime. So they're placing a different bet, and we're kind of playing a different game at that highest level. That's probably the biggest difference I see. But even the folks at the highest level are like, what's gonna happen with Facebook?
You've actually just triggered one final question for me as I was thinking that
Sure.
through. Just because you do see a lot of different ad accounts and work across a lot of different clients. In 2022, is Facebook ads particularly suited to any type of product, service, or industry? So are there any trends that you see where it's maybe easier to use Facebook ads to scale a type of company?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a really good question. I think it comes down to the advertiser's ability on Facebook specifically to get someone to take an action that isn't necessarily looking for it off the bat. And I also think there has to be a little more than an initial sale to it. So I know that's not industry specific, but we have a client in the music industry, is the best way to put it, and they're selling one thing, and once the sale's done, like that's kind of it. And so what we're working with them on is, if we have an upsell and we get 10% of the people to spend $100 more, now this funnel's profitable. And how can we look at things beyond that initial sale? If it's only, I have a $50 product and I can spend $25 in ads to make that happen, like I think it's going to be tougher in general. And I think it's going to limit the ability of someone to do well on Facebook.
Yeah, before I let you go, do you want to let our listeners know where they can find out more about you and your business?
Sure. If the website is clicksandclients.com, clicksandclients.com, and they can reach me directly at clients@clicksandclients, which is the original email I created before we had any employees to make it seem like we were bigger than we were. So clients@clicksandclients goes directly to me still.
Wonderful. All that's left to say is, Paul, thank you so much for your time. This has been the Internet Marketing Podcast. Take care.
Thank you.